Thank you for everyone who's joining us this morning to discuss what employees think of their managers and how you can be a better manager. My name is Jill Seeley, and I'm joined by Robert Newland.
Good morning.
Morning, Robert. He's the CEO and president of Newland Associates. At Newland Associates, we help organizations decode the human in order to achieve their business objectives and really help align their people strategy with their business strategy. We do this through HR advisory, talent acquisition, and talent management. And we are also Predictive Index certified partners. It's one tool that we use to help organizations with talent optimization. We had a question from a participant come in asking about PI and how it's used. So just to kind of answer that question or touch on it briefly, PI, our Predictive Index, is a psychometric assessment, and it measures key drives in order to help us predict behaviors. These, along with the PI cognitive assessment, are used primarily to match individuals to job targets that are set by executives and leaders within a company. And it's been shown to increase the predictability of an employee's job performance significantly versus solely just relying on resumes and interviews alone. I could talk about Predictive Index all day long, so if you want more information, we can definitely talk offline. Our contact information will be presented at the end, and certainly we can get your information and have a deeper conversation about that. But we can go on and talk about today. What we're going to do is share some findings and data from two studies that were conducted by Predictive Index. The first is the 2018 People Management Study, and it's one of the largest studies of its kind. It surveyed over 5,000 employees across 22 industries, asking people what people thought of their managers. And then the second is the 2019 follow-up as the People Management Report, and that reveals the subtle ways that managers sabotage their teams. So good morning again, Robert, and to begin, what can you tell us about what the study has found about how managers do sabotage their teams?
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here today. And I was looking at our pictures, and for some reason, my background is a great background, and Jill seems to be, I want to go back to the picture. She seems to be sitting in a place where she's having a great time. So we need to work on that, Jill. I need to hang out with you more often, obviously. But anyway, so it's an interesting topic. You know, we think about managers and their best traits, but oftentimes we really don't talk about what could be some of the worst traits. And you know, when we do testing, for example, for job fit, we like to test, you know, who do great at their jobs. We also try to figure out who doesn't do great at their jobs, because there's learning in both. So in terms of sabotaging their teams, and I'm going to go quickly to the 2018 studies, you're going to find that here are some traits of what are called terrible managers. And these are managers that are rated very low in the study. You can see 15% of them don't communicate clear expectations. They play favorites, which is a really, really bad thing. And we talk about performance management, but notice that the concern from people is not whether their performance is being managed, but more around the sense of, you know, are we worrying about my career and personal development? And then this whole bad mouthing behind the back is, hey, don't tell anybody but. You know, it's the grapevine exists. Everybody finds that. It's something that shouldn't be happening. And then the last one, which is going to be a common theme later on, is that, you know, they're not open, you know, to feedback, which is really a bad thing. If you look at this correlates with the 2019 study, which is really interesting. And look at the pink, let's call it pinkish. 96% in the statement, I can approach my manager with problems or tough issues, versus 43% of people that have bad managers. It's a stark contrast. And then if you look at the bottom, that's pretty significant. My manager respects my personal values, even if they disagree. 88%, the pinkish, is the one people with good managers, and the orange is the people with bad managers. So if you think that there isn't a remarkable difference in terms of how people react or respond to good managers or bad managers, well, study shows that there is indeed, Jill, a big, big difference.
Yeah, so clearly being able to approach one's manager and feel valued weighs pretty heavily on employees as factors that they need to feel psychologically safe. What do the findings tell us about that psychological safety and turnover?
So first, let's explain what psychological safety is very, very briefly. And so this is not about, going to therapy or anything like that. It's more about, not being punished or humiliated for sharing concerns, ideas, having questions, mistakes, etc. Are you creating an environment where people feel that they can share those things, that they can make mistakes, that if they see something wrong with the business, that they can share it? And so the impact of turnover is, is very interesting. And I'm going to go again to the 2018 study. I know you guys are going to get the 2019, but actually reach out to us. We'll get you the 2018 as well. And this is a great question on turnover, which is how likely are you to work for another organization within the next 12 months? And if you look at the blue, you're going to see to the left that is a very high bar. It says very unlikely. But if you look at the purple, people with bad managers, you look to the right, it's very likely. So it basically inverts itself, right? So if you are working with a great manager, it is not very likely that you're going to be looking for work in another company. But if you're working with a not so great or bad manager, it is very likely that you are. And this validates that saying that says, people don't leave, their jobs, they leave their bosses. So it's a pretty strong statement of that reality. What I'm going to show you now, and just you're going to see some information here that is on a scale from 1 to 5 and 1 to 10, and that's because when it's a 1 to 5 like this one, this is from the 2019 study. When it's a 1 to 10, it's from the 2018 study. So look at this. The average rating on the statement, I can easily approach my manager for help, right? And then the likelihood of leaving the organization. Well, if your manager is very approachable, you're a 4.5, you're least likely to exit. But if your manager is less approachable, you get a 3.3, you're most likely to exit. So what we see, although it's a different kind of a question, it's interesting because it helps you validate through different questions that the results are being consistent. Great managers help you stay in an organization. Bad managers make you leave an organization. So if you have challenges around turnover, this could be part of the things that you need to be addressing, Jill.
Perfect. And clearly, managers have a tremendous impact on turnover. And you noted that people don't leave companies, people leave their managers.
Right.
And, we've seen what employees want from their managers to feel that psychological safety. But what other skills do the findings show that people really need their managers to show up with?
And I know you and I discussed this, and to me this one was really, really fascinating because, again, you see a stark contrast between what's on the mind of managers versus what's on the minds of people, right? So let's look at, you're going to see this word cloud here, and then for those that don't like word clouds like me, when you're going to have a list on the left, I'm a bit more linear sometimes. So what's on top of, the mind of managers, and you see big there on the word cloud delegation. So they're really worried about, how do I delegate? And then, we're talking about low unemployment growth, so, a lot of issues around hiring, and then communication, although I would argue that sometimes communication is more about telling, not so much communicating. And then how do I train, which a lot of it has to do with the technical or hard skills of a job more than anything else. And then number 5 is feedback. I mean, there are more, but you can see that the top 5 right there, what's top of mind for managers are delegation, hiring, communication, training, and feedback. So you see that, and that was on the 2018. Then on the 2018, we said, okay, but you being managed, what is it you think managers need to focus on, right? What are they lacking? And, well, look at this. The number 1 skill that managers are lacking is team building, which was nowhere near that top 5, not even the top 10 or top 15 in the minds of managers. So what we're learning from employees is, look, you need to learn how to build your team, how to make it effective, efficient. It's on you to help us do that. And that is very different from the traditional, you have to do the job, but more of how do I put the right people in the right place? How do I speak to them? And I'm going to quote Jill. I used to hate this statement, and I'm a fan now, and she always tells me, Robert, the difference between the golden rule, which is treat everybody as you would treat yourself, you need to retain that to the platinum rule, which is treat everybody as they want to be treated. I'm learning, Jill, right?
Yeah, treating people how they need to be treated.
Exactly, I'm learning. And so look at the contrast here between one and the other. Number 2 after that is going to be providing feedback, which would rank number 5 with managers. So what's number 2 for employees is number 5 for managers. And team building is just nowhere near that group, Jill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so obviously the level of importance that's placed on feedback ranks quite differently in priorities from management to employees. Yep. What does that tell us in terms of feedback and the findings on its importance between good managers and bad managers?
So, again, an interesting point. I mean, we just went over what's important for managers was top of mind versus what do employees think should be top of mind for managers. And yes, team building was number 1. Feedback is still very, very important. And I want us to address feedback because we have some really good information on both studies about it. So let's begin with the first graph. And look at this. If you look at the left, right, you're going to see how great managers fare when it comes to giving feedback. And you see that big blue 77%. It says that I get just the right amount of feedback. So great managers seem to have a sense of what is just the right amount of feedback to give an employee. If you look at the pie chart to the right, how bad managers fare when it comes to giving feedback, you're going to see the dark purple, 39%, right? It says, I don't get any feedback. So basically, nearly 40% of bad managers do not provide feedback. Big contrast. What's worse is that bad managers, 42%.
Wow.
The statement is, I get some feedback, but not as much as I'd like. So if you go from no feedback to very little feedback, you're basically seeing 4 out of every 5 managers are not giving feedback or not enough feedback. And one of the things you and I talked about was this could be an issue because you may have, this may be one manager that does this, the other one doesn't, but you can have one manager managing a lot more people, and if it is a bad manager, it can be very impactful in the organization.
Right.
The other chart that we have here, and again, this is a rating from 1 to 5, right, is frequency on feedback. What is just the right amount of feedback? And yeah, that varies by industry, type of job, whether it is blue collar, white collar, executive sales, etc. But notice at how it trends when you get manager ratings on a scale from 1 to 5. If you don't provide feedback, your average manager rating is 2.6. And if you provide daily feedback, it's 3.9. I'm not saying that you have to provide feedback on a daily basis. That's just sometimes not practical. But at least on a monthly basis, you're jumping a whole point. On a scale from 1 to 5, that's jumping 20%, my friends. That is huge. Mm-hmm. So if you can go from never to monthly, and that shouldn't be that much of an effort, right?
Right.
Now, we'll talk more about how to communicate, because you provide feedback you don't do it the right way. That may also not be beneficial.
Well, that leads us to a really good point. And we did have a question that came in, and someone asked, how do you encourage honesty and genuine discussion with younger employees about their career aspirations and plans? And I think the key to that is feedback from everything that the data shows. And one of the things that is very important, or that I think we're going to talk about, is the importance of people data in using the information we can glean from things like psychometric assessments on not only what the data suggests, but how people need to be communicated to, going back to that platinum rule. So what is the difference between managers that leverage people data?
Yeah, so let's go back to psychologically safe. It sounds like, psychology, but you can apply some behavioral science to this, to understand people motivations and behaviors, and certainly Predictive Index, as with many other tools, is something that you can do. So there is data you can leverage. What I mean by that is, and we're talking about, and we're going to go deeper into this, when you're providing feedback, it's not just any feedback, but the appropriate feedback. And going back to the platinum rule, if you understand whom you have in front of you, you can provide the right kind of feedback. So how do people feel then about managers that, oops, I think I jumped. Let me go back here. Yeah. How do people feel about managers that use behavioral assessment? And it's not that we ask them, do you know your manager uses a behavioral assessment? But we ask managers, are you using behavioral assessments for hiring? And are you using them post-hire? And then what we found is that those managers that were using that, well, the ones that were using them actually rank higher in that scale from 1 to 5 rating. So 3.3 to 3.7 on hiring, and 3.2 to 3.8 on post-hire. And what this tells us, again, is that using psychometrics allows you to understand better the person. You can build a better relationship. And if you can do that with your employees as a manager, you're likely going to be perceived as a better manager because you understand them better. In other words, I always, hiring, for example, is like, in the traditional way. You get somebody into your organization, you have a new employee, you basically speed date it through, 3 interviews or speed dates, and you get to know them in about 3 months. Or you can use behavioral assessments to get to know them right off the bat and build a better relationship. So something to think about when it comes to that, I think is very, very strong, Jill.
Yeah. One of the other questions that was submitted was how to make people feel empowered to lead despite the fact that you tell them constantly that they can do it, but they just don't seem to take you up on that offer. And I think that speaks a lot to psychometrics and understanding what drives people and having those people in the right roles and understanding how to leverage their basic needs and behaviors to get them to show up the way that you need them to show up. So, does the number of direct reports impact at all the manager rating?
Yeah, and notice how nice is this one, because we're talking about, feedback is important, great. How frequent the feedback, great. You're using, data, psychometric data, technology to get information, seems to work. But direct reports, we tend to think that, if we have too many direct reports, that's going to have an impact on manager rating. And frankly, I was one that thought that was likely going to be the case. But when you look at the study, what it's saying is that, look, if you have 1 to 2 direct reports, your rating on average is a 3.6. Remember, this is the average. This is not good managers or bad managers. This is just the average. But if you have more than 10, it's also 3.6. And I don't see anything in particular that drives it down to 3.4 in 6 to 10 direct reports, other than maybe just the size of the sample. But it's fairly consistent across the board. It doesn't seem to be an issue. That may also be a function of, because this is everybody in the same pod. I'm sure that if you segment this probably by industry or by level of management, the numbers may be different. So also keep that in mind, meaning that, if you're a manufacturing facility and you're overlooking, a group of operators, you may be a group leader with 20, that may be different than if you're a CEO, or likely you want to have, 5, 7 direct reports as well. But that's more an operational function and really a perception of what is a good manager or bad manager. But here is what drives more the opinion of good managers and bad managers. And I love this because it shows the things that managers care about. How do employees feel about that, right? And obviously the one in the middle, which I'm not marking, which is makes good decisions. Obviously, good managers are in the blue with 78%, bad managers 51%. But I want to highlight some other ones and sort of frame for you their value. So we begin from the left. You see a red square, a rectangle, I should say. Good managers at 70% in motivates others, whereas bad managers are 38%. If you go to the right, the second rectangle, cares about my career and personal development, good manager 71%. Great managers 71%, good managers 42%. So there's a big contrast between, I meant to say, great managers and good managers. And then if you look at the third rectangle to the right, great managers listen well, 74% versus 48% good managers. So it seems that it's not so much the amount of direct reports that you have, but really the focus of your engagement with your staff, right? And again, understanding who they are behaviorally, providing a psychologically safe environment for them to share their views and ideas, and then focusing on these things is what it can take you, I guess, to probably, quote the book, if you see, how does this level up and top, to move from good to great as a manager. It does make a big, big difference, Jill.
Right, and, one of the questions that was submitted was, what is the best structure for smaller departments who have high volumes of workloads and when there's no option to expand the department at the moment? And I think asking structurally what the best way to do that is maybe not the right question in terms of asking how are the managers getting more out of their employees. And I think we've seen that, it doesn't take a manager to have fewer employees to be a good manager. The size of the team isn't as important. But let's talk about engagement and the level of effort that engaged employees give versus none.
Yeah, and by the way, Jill is answering some questions from people that registered, and the reason why we brought that one up, when she brought this one up in a very timely fashion here, is because if you're looking at a team, look, if you have enough work for 20 and you only have 10, you need to hire another 10. Don't get me wrong. There is no other answer. However, your 10 employees could be doing the work of 6 or the work of 12, and that is going to be a function of engagement. There's no way they're going to do the work of 20 unless you make it work, But,
right.
But you could get, the work of 12 out of 10, but really, if you do it wrong, you may just be getting the work of 6 out of 10. So let's talk about what the survey is telling us, right? First, are there that many table managers? Well, if you look at table managers and not so great managers, you're looking at about 20%. So 1 in 5 is really not a great manager or terrible manager, and that is concerning. And I think I said it before that this may be 20% of your management, but 20% of your management may be very well managing 60% of your workforce. So I don't want you to take comfort in this number, right? Also, another 20% are average. So, good and great, you're looking at 60% more or less. There's a 40% you need to work on, and that's really interesting data. Now, let's talk about engagement. And engagement is usually described or defined as, that discretionary effort that you do, the space between getting the job done or complying with what the minimum, requirements of the job, or doing the best you can do. That discretionary effort is what we call engagement. It's one of the definitions. And the way that the study defined it here, which I love, is overall, I feel passion and energy for my job. And that's a great way to define engagement as well. And we were talking about bad managers and great managers. We said we're looking at organizations that have, 20% not so great, terrible managers, great managers, or another 40%. There's another 20% in the middle that are average, So how is this meaningful? How do you get to the question from the participant, how do I deal with this? I have all this work and, a small group of people. Well, if you look at this chart and look to the right, you're going to see the statement, I overall feel passionate for my job. It goes really, really high in the light blue in the people with great managers, but it's maybe 40% ahead of the bar in terms of people with bad managers. If you go to agree, same thing, you're looking at 40% of them feel that way versus a smaller amount of people that have bad managers. So time and time again, I think the message here has been, strength around building teams, providing feedback, providing the appropriate feedback, noticing that frequency is important as well, noticing that the things we need to focus on is not just performance management, and that what that yields in terms of this discretionary effort, also known as engagement. So I think Jill's spot on in her answer about the person that asked that question. Drive engagement, you're going to get better results in that smaller team, Jill.
Yeah. And organizations are faced with managing a multi-generational workforce right now. And also you've done webinars in the past, or Newland's done webinars in the past around shifting demographics in the workplace, and how the Me Too movement has affected things, and being able to work together and lead in environments that are dynamic. What does the data show us about age and gender disparities when it comes to management and leadership?
Well, I think a lot of people are going to be surprised by this. You and I were discussing yesterday how we have all these ideas about millennials, et cetera, and we sort of label them in a particular way, and the study is so different from the perceptions that we have. So we're going to talk about age and gender for a little bit, and this graph, I want you to pay attention, because it's not talking about millennials, it's not talking about Gen Xers or boomers. It's talking about the age of the person managing you and how it affects manager rating on a scale from 1 to 5. So if you're younger than manager, you're given a 3.6. If you're about the same age as the manager, it's a 3.6. And if you're older than your manager, it's about a 3.5. So the study is not seeing a big difference between, only the managers that are my senior are going to get a better rating.
Right, and that's important, as 10,000 baby boomers turn 65 every day.
Yeah.
And, more of the younger generations are managing more and more people. So I think that's good data to show us that those don't have to be factors.
So we shouldn't be afraid in giving, the younger generation management jobs.
Absolutely. Millennial is not a dirty word.
It's not a dirty word. I agree 100%. So all of you listening that are millennials, make sure to share this with other people. And now, let's get more, millennial or Gen Y specific. It's even better. Mm-hmm. In the 2018 study, which we were rating on a 1 to 10 scale, you see that the average rating by generation, Gen Y or millennials, they were actually killing it. They were on top of everybody with 7.4 versus 7.3 for Gen Xers, and baby boomers were at 7.1. It's not a stark contrast between the three of them, but I think the underlying message here is that, millennials are ready to manage. They are. I think what happens, Jill, oftentimes is that, as owners of second stage businesses, we may be older, so we may have a worldview, so we may think that while millennials may not manage according to a worldview, well, they're managing people their age or younger. They may be managing according to the worldview of their staff.
Right.
So that may be something that we need to comprehend and we need to leverage. Just because it's not a worldview, it doesn't mean that it can't be leveraged. It just means it is in our worldview, but not everything that works in this world, comports to our worldview. By the way, I don't mean personal values. I mean the way in which we envision things can work, whether it is, a marketing operation or a manufacturing operation or an accounting operation. And I think a great example of that, I remember years ago talking to a great leader from an insurance company. I had about 1,000 employees, and he would tell me, I did an interview with him about his leadership skills, and I asked him, how do you tell, who's going to be a great leader in the organization? Mm-hmm. And the guy said, I get here every day at about 7:30 a.m., and I leave by 7. And I watch who comes in early and who leaves late. And that tells me who's going to be a great leader. So this is a brilliant man, a successful man that was applying the golden rule. In other words, he was defining success and leadership by his worldview, which wasn't necessarily, the whole organization.
Right. But I can imagine that the people coming in early and staying late, that's what goes directly to that discretionary effort and engagement. So when you can make the connection that your engaged employees are going to become your next leaders, and keep the more engaged employees you have, the better off you're going to be overall as these demographics do shift.
Yeah, and let's talk about gender, because we mentioned that as well in this set of slides. And it's fascinating. There are a number of assessments that cannot be utilized for selection because they create, adverse impact. Some of these assessments may imply that women are, more collaborative and supportive, and that men are more telling and in charge. And I think there's a lot of world preconceptions that men are leaders and women are not. Mm-hmm. And, well, the world is wrong.
The world is wrong.
The world is very wrong.
As it can be sometimes.
Yeah, because look at this. This is a rating for male and female managers, right? And the ones that got 10, they were mostly women. There were also men, don't get me wrong. We didn't do that bad. But, men and women, they're out there. So we really don't see that much of a difference, because when you average, the 8, the 9s, and the 10s, it's going to come about even for men and women. Maybe women with...
Women are going to have a slight edge. Let's be honest. Women have a slight edge, Robert.
I work with women. My wife, I have a boy with 2 girls, so I have to agree with that notion. But, the data sustains it. So it's pretty consistent. And I think that's important when we say, well, this is more of a job for a man. I think oftentimes that happens when we have certain preconceptions about things. And again, it comports our worldview, but it isn't necessarily the view of the rest of the world. So you have to look at your audience, you have to look at your staff, and be able to determine, what is really good for them, not just what is in accordance with my worldview.
So, we talked now about the difference between managers across demographics, but what does the data tell us about managers across different industries?
And, that was also interesting. We thought there would be bigger differences, but again, this one is based on a scale from 1 to 5, and the average here is about, 3.5 to 3.6. It's fairly steady. Construction, education, manufacturing rate lower at 3.3. You have 2 highlights in energy at 3.7, and health and life sciences and 3.7. But we did not see in the study, a significant difference between, this industry or that industry. I would word of caution construction, education, and manufacturing, because they seem to be fairly off the rest, of the average. But I don't think there's much difference between a 3.6 and a 3.7. Now, 3.3, yeah, well, you may want to see what's going on there.
Right, absolutely. So, going across industries, across demographics, it seems everybody has the opportunity to be good managers, but also bad managers. And when I first got into management years ago, I had a mentor, and they gave me a solid piece of advice, which was, if you want to succeed as a manager, find out what's important to your CEO and make it important to you. And that's always kind of stuck with me. So what does the findings tell us about how CEOs feel?
So this is, not to teach you guys, but there is another CEO study that we can share with you as well. And this is a 2019 study, and I thought it was very, very insightful. I have to tell you, the views of CEOs around talent has been shifting dramatically, okay? And so let me first share with you this slide, which is, what is your number one priority? And for 40% of CEOs that were surveyed, I think there were like about 1,000 of them, number one was strategy. bar none. It was clearly strategy. But pretty much one out of every 3 CEOs said, talent strategy, to be more specific. Notice it wasn't just hiring, but talent strategy. And I think what's happening here, and we see this also through other studies with other organizations in top performer organizations, is that CEOs are beginning to realize that talent management has got to be more about talent strategy than just HR administration. So I get it. If you can reduce your workers' comp, by 25 grand in a year, you're helping the company bottom line. But if you focus on that and not on strategizing talent so that it aligns with the business, so that it provides appropriate outcomes, then you're really focusing on the cost-cutting side and not really on the outcome-driven ROI side. And I think that's very interesting in terms of how we see the framework of thinking of CEOs shifting. The other slide we have from that study is this one, and it's about what are your biggest challenges, right? If you're a CEO and you get to choose up to 3, and the ones that are in purple relate to talent or talent optimization or talent strategy. Notice number 1 on all of that was finding the right talent. So it's interesting. I want to go back to the first slide on CEOs. Their number 1 priority is strategy development, but that is a priority. What is the challenge? Well, that may be your priority, but what challenged you the most is finding the right talent. It's not just finding people, but finding the right people. And notice the difference between that. I think oftentimes organizations, when they do talent acquisition or recruiting, they do a lot of rinse repeat. They hire, they fire, they hire, they fire. We say oftentimes that, we hire to skill and we fire to fit. And we see a lot of that, yet organizations keep repeating that over and over and over. And what the CEOs are saying is, we need to find the right talent. Don't just get me warm bodies. But we find many organizations are still too focused on just getting the warm bodies. If you go to number 3, which is also around talent, is aligning employees with strategy, which kind of comports with their number 1 priority. So talent and business strategy, or talent strategy and business strategy, tremendously correlate with the CEOs that were surveyed here. The next one around talent, which is 4th overall, is getting the most out of my people. It goes back to engagement and that discretionary effort. So again, it all gets so intertwined. And then creating a great work environment. Think about the 2 things that we discussed, Jill, before. One was the psychologically safe environment, right?
Right.
That is one, and the other one is, team building. People say, I need team building. So obviously, if you have a good team, that also creates a better work environment. If you have this functional team, you're not going to have a great work environment. So it's all really intertwined, and just fascinating to me how it all comes together in 3 different studies that support one another consistently. So that's why I feel that, today we wanted to not just give a lot of opinions, but actually show a lot of data with some feedback sprinkled on top of that, because, the data doesn't lie, and it's right here.
And one of the other questions that was submitted, and, I saved this for the end because I think it perfectly sort of summarizes what we're talking about. The question was, after the acquisition of a business, the people and operations are merged in a matter of months. However, the cultural assimilation takes years. How can leadership leverage middle management for a smooth business culture integration? I think that's a tremendous question, and I think it starts from the top. It has to start from leadership, and that whoever's at the top, the senior leaders, need to create a clear mission, vision, and values that's understood by everybody. So the team is all rowing in the right direction. And in order to do that, they have to agree and align on their business strategies. What are those mission critical strategies that they need to succeed? They need to have alignment so everybody's on board, and then they need to figure out ways to align their talent, putting the people in the right places so they can, again, all row in the same direction. And I think that is the power that psychometrics and analytics gives us, because it's about talent optimization. It's it's the fact that we consult with all of our clients that are PI clients, and really the organizations that leverage talent optimization succeed in reaching their business goals. So when you couple optimizing your talent with building strong leaders, then that assimilation is going to go much more smoothly and quickly.
Yeah, that is spot on, Jill.
So one of the other questions that we had were, what are some of the best ways to foster leadership within smaller organizations looking towards company growth? Again, I think that is another question that leads back to everything that we've talked about here, and I think looking at investing in your manager's development, making sure that many managers are promoted because of their functional knowledge.
Right.
And there's not a ton of organizations, especially smaller organizations, that have the kind of capital to invest in leadership skills. So tell us a little bit more about some of the other suggestions, Robert. You've obviously made a successful business. It's a small organization, and you coach leaders all the time. So what are successful organizations doing?
Well, thank you for that, but I have to go back to the question about the smaller businesses because, first, I love GrowFL. I've got involved with them. I belong to CEO peer group of executive stage companies, which is one of the best things that happened to me as a CEO. It's a great, great concept. And in one of our CEO peer groups, I was telling the other CEOs, we actually had one of our consultants go talk about emotional intelligence as it ties to neuro-leadership and neuroscience and neuro-leadership, which is very interesting. And when we finished, I said to the group, as owners and CEOs of second stage companies, sometimes we don't realize that we may behave like, benevolent dictators of banana republics, where we just want people to just do their job. And while that sounds great in theory, the reality is that managing people, it has a lot more nuance than that. And if we want to outperform the competition, and if we want to grow and succeed, we need to make talent strategy a big, big part of our business strategy, as we saw here how CEOs of these organizations are doing it. In terms of, based on the information we have here today, we put together a couple of bullets for you. The first one is definitely invest in management development, coaching skills, and I'm not saying by that make your managers executive coaches, but help them develop coaching skills, right? They can help you in those one-on-one conversations so they can be more meaningful, more career-driven, and they can help drive employee engagement. The other one is, hire and promote based on job fit. We too often, I said it before, we hire based on skills. We call it, the briefcase, education, experience, technical skills, etc. But is the person a good job fit in terms of behavioral and cognitive ability for the job, whether, the job is one that requires a lot of time sitting down, analyzing, or is a job where you need to be on the road. An interview is not enough. You can't, for the life of me, I tell you, you can't in an interview figure out somebody, not in 3 interviews. It's just not going to happen. So put science to work for you, but also for promotion. We recently had a client for whom we did a retained search assignment for a director, a VP, and they wanted to then promote somebody from within the organization for a job, and utilizing, in this case, we're using Predictive Index, they were able to realize that, it was not going to be a good fit for the job. They didn't promote the person, and what this person doesn't know is that probably because of this, he still has a job, because I promise you, if he would have had the job a year from now, he would have been fired. So promoting people into the right jobs is really, really important. Right. Workforce analytics, there are many. We certainly are more familiar with the Predictive Index. I think they can be so helpful. Just like you have your CFO give you information on financial performance, it's not just the accounting. To me, in HR, hiring, firing is the accounting. The analytics is what you get, the equivalent of accounting when you take to financial reporting. You need the financial reporting. You need the financial analytics. Well, in talent, you need talent analytics to look at your workforce and find ways to create productivity around them. And lastly, the message is clear. Managers need to work on developing effective teams. And that goes from the manager having the appropriate skill set to build teams, but then the actual team having the ability to understand each other and work together.
And, just to mention that, you said giving the managers the information they need to develop the teams. I think the one nice thing also about Predictive Index or other psychometrics is that it helps the managers become self-aware of not just themselves, but their team as well, and how everybody needs to show up. And I think it's very clear that self-awareness is one of the key ingredients to successful leadership. So if we have a manager that is aware of everybody on their team, but they don't understand or they're not self-aware of their own behaviors, I think then they're missing the mark. So I really feel like having the right data gives us all of the tools that we need. And then there's a certain level of development around not just how to be, but then how to execute these strategies, how to give feedback, when to give feedback. And I think that's where, managers becoming strong coaches is essential. And that's not something people learn just by picking up a book. That's something that's developed over time through very purposeful development efforts.
You wish to show that teach that in college or something like that.
I have my thoughts on that.
Yeah, how to coach.
Right.
Oh, how to get a mortgage.
Right.
Would be another good one.
And I think we got to most all of the questions. If we didn't, here in a couple slides we have our contact information, but there's so much great information in these studies. So if you or anybody on the phone would like a copy of the studies, go ahead. You can just put your phone up to the screen and scan that QR code.
I'm going to do it right now to test it as you talk.
Yeah. It should work. Let's give it a try. So if you put your phone right up to there, it should pop up with a link that allows you to request your copy of that management report.
It works. It's awesome.
Awesome. And then the last thing that, as a participant, that we'd love to offer you is a complimentary leadership assessment. So again, if you want to scan that QR code, it will also take you to a link for a complimentary assessment, and we'd love to discuss and review with you. Our contact information is there, and again, thank you so much for joining us, and we've had a great time talking with you, and hope that you've gotten a lot from the information that we've shared.
Yeah. Thank you, Jill, for doing this with me, and thank you, Hannah, and the people at GrowFL for partnering with us for this great event.
Of course, thank you both for presenting today, and like I said earlier, a recording of the webinar and the slide deck will be sent out shortly after the webinar concludes this morning, as well as the contact info for both Jill and Robert. So thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning, and I hope you all have a great rest of your week.